up behind me.
In the past, the ultra-rich and powerful made sure that their culture was utterly distinct from that of the unwashed masses. Opera versus music hall, the grand oil painting versus the cheap print. But now the rich like and buy art that is popular with pretty much everyone. Why? Part of the answer is that artists have transformed themselves into brands. Just as it is, we can't mistake McDonald's for other kinds of burgers. With the successful artist brand, they become elevated into this strange, allegorical, slightly robotic figure, which does something very distinct over and over again. This is Andy Warhol's Marilyn diptych, one of a series of works that he painted shortly after her death. And an iconic piece of Warhol's art, drawing indeed on an iconic image of Marilyn Monroe, one which was very well known, repeated over and over again. Warhol himself stages that repetition, first in garish colour and then in a kind of fading black and white, as if the star is being gradually overexposed. You might see that as a symbol of death, but also of media overexposure too. Marilyn is, in a sense, a perfect subject for Warhol. He's obsessed with celebrity, with money, with the action of the media, with what the media does to people. You might almost call it a critical examination, except that Warhol does not oppose it exactly, as embrace it and try and push it further. In this work, it's as if you're seeing a magazine reproduction which has gone slightly wrong when the colours are misregistered, for instance. You know, the colour of Kodachrome in those films of the era when reproduced on the page. So you get a series of equally bright, slightly altered, garish and slightly nightmarish Marilyns. There's a way in which Warhol has got at the idea through his art that celebrity and celebrity branding, that it's the image which is everything. The content, in a sense, doesn't matter. Okay, so one can look at this Marilyn diptych and think about the figure of Marilyn herself, if we wish, but it's not entirely necessary, or at least there's an oscillation, perhaps, between thinking of the figure of the actor herself and the image. Both Marilyn and Andy, as he became known, were very self-conscious brands, people who were often reduced to a photographic image of themselves, as it were. Warhol talked about how there's only surface to him. There's nothing underneath. It's just surface. That's all you get. There is quite a long moment which Warhol goes through when he's seen as being far too obsessed with money, with becoming rich, with doing celebrity portraits for all sorts of industrialists and other uncool figures, to be a really serious artist. But as celebrity culture catches up with the art world, then suddenly Warhol seems like a pioneering figure. This is a photographic self-portrait by Sarah Lucas, who became very famous in the 1990s as one of the so-called young British art generation. We see her sitting here in a very male pose with her legs open, wearing clothes which are, at best, could be worn by males or females, but particularly the shoes seem something that a man would wear, a very large slip-on. And she's looking very confrontationally at the camera, staring up at it, and of course she's wearing on her breasts 2 fried eggs. And this points to a rather vulgar joke, working class reference to female genitalia, 2 fried eggs and a kebab. Lucas's works are about sex, about sexual desire, about puns, about sexual humour. One of the tasks of the artist is to become an exceptional individual. And with Lucas, it's this apparently working class woman who is acting out very masculine, macho roles in various ways. And it's something that she performs over and over again in different works. So this is merely one of quite a large photographic series of portraits which she does, in which she presents herself in this way and at the same time makes rather vulgar jokes. There is definitely a strong aspect of feminist critique to Lucas's work. She is saying, we construct ourselves, and you can see me doing it here very clearly. But at the same time, it's not clear that it's condemnation. So very much like the work of Andy Warhol, we can flip it one way or the other. We might see it as a critical comment on gender roles, or equally as somebody wallowing a little bit in the sort of media degradation with which we're surrounded. This is a print by Sarah Lucas, and she's done something very simple. She's taken a double-page spread from the Sunday Sport from November 1990, and she's made photocopies from it. She's using a relatively small photocopier, so there are 4 separate segments. She sort of roughly stitched them together and represents them. Now, this version of the work is relatively small, but she's done a very large one too, which is maybe about 8 feet across, something like that. So it really confronts you in the gallery, and you can read every line. Although this seems to be a mere copy or transcription of something that you would look at and then throw away immediately, because Lucas the artist brand, this masculine, feminine, gender-swapping, apparently working class figure has appropriated it herself, then it becomes something else. The very fact of taking this double-page spread, blowing it up, it's again part of a series, there's the number that she does, blowing it up to the size of a history painting, framing it and putting it into a white cube, that in itself is it's both shocking, but it's also media friendly. Warhol starts out as a commercial artist and spends a lot of time drawing shoes, in fact. Warhol stands at the cusp of postmodern culture, you might say, and some of the archetypal theorists of postmodern culture have looked at his work very carefully, and they thought about the difference between what you might see, say, when Van Gogh paints shoes, when he paints peasant labourer shoes. Van Gogh is trying, through his own intense labour in the paint surface, which you can see very clearly. Van Gogh doesn't conceal his marks or anything like that. You can see something about his organic engagement with those objects as symbols of hard labour. With Warhol, when he paints shoes, there's nothing of that, and there's not meant to be. Warhol says over and over again, don't expect any depth from me, the surface is all you get. Artists have long been famous, of course. Well, successful artists have long been famous, and some of them have been celebrities as well. Picasso was hugely famous, hugely recognizable, but he was not a brand. His vision of the world is extremely complex, and in looking into his work, there is at least the illusion of a depthlessness, that you will never get to the bottom of it. Now, with someone like Warhol, that is quite different. And indeed, a principled shallowness seems to replace that feeling of depthlessness. And with Lucas, I think it's quite similar. It's the same old jokes are being made, the same interests are at play. And that is what you would expect of the brand. The brand always has to push the same line. There was a definite charge in the 1990s when Lucas and members of her generation started to bring in references to working class culture, and it meant for quite a long time that there were many collectors and art institutions who did not take that work seriously. But once this stuff gets drawn into elite culture, into major collections like the Tates, there's another effect starts to happen. The rich collectors are no longer seeking to distinguish themselves by collecting things which other people don't understand. And this becomes even more marked as social media start to take off. Then both the museums and indeed the collectors start to follow the public in some way. I'm looking at the Instagram account of the artist Emilia Almond. The very fact that it's on an open and tagged Instagram feed makes it available to anybody who has access to social media, which is nowadays about half the world. She moves to Los Angeles and starts to present herself as a sexually available object. There are pictures, for instance, with a tick box: single, no; taken, no; busy getting money, yes. And of course, these are all the time gathering followers on Instagram and comments. She goes through a darker phase still, where she appears perhaps drug-addled. Some very dark pictures here of her tear-stained face. At a certain point it ends, and she declares, "What I've been doing is not real, it's not straight, it's all been an act for the camera." And this is a very canny and critical piece of work. It says something about the intense way in which social media exposes people and affects and perhaps infects every aspect of your life. So this work, which has become known as Excellences and Perfections, has hugely elevated her position and the prices of her work. In a sense, it's a very successful self-branding exercise, and at the same time, a critical comment on capitalist culture. Warhol is the archetypal branded artist. He sits at the apex of this, in a sense. He's one of the most expensive artists on the planet, one of the most famous, one of the most recognizable, one of the most accessible. So if you want to hang something on your living room wall which says, "I appreciate fame and art and money, Warhol is it." If you wanted to acquire a work like Marilyn Diptych, assuming that it was available that you could, it's going to cost you something like $100 million, a truly vast sum. The great difference between what the rich have on their walls and what everybody else has on their walls is that the rich have the originals.